Okay, and slides are here, I see. So I'm really grateful to organizers of this conference to invite me for the second time because like I thought last year I said everything I had to say, and this year I had to add a little bit. So last year I was talking about this book that I did, Architectural Principles in the Age of Fraud. And now I'm kind of talking about what could I talk about, just the kind of next step, basically what happens subsequently. Not really the second part, but let's say, well, it is the second part, okay? So I'm talking about a research project here, and a research project that talks about our current situation and our situation today, and the situation in which we find ourselves with narratives about architecture and how things are justified and the problems we encounter here, all of us, in Norway especially, my examples are Norwegian, essentially the kind of debates that we have and trying to make some kind of sense of it. And much of it has to do with with greenwashing. We live in there are two views, you see. Like there's one view that says, okay, now we live in an era of strong and well-justified ecological concerns. Fair enough. But there is another view that says we live in an era of faking such concerns, basically of pretending to have it. And that's a massive problem. And that's like we have come to the state that these false concerns, these ways of pretending are really obstructing even acting in ecologically responsible ways. So this is what I'm talking today, and how this phenomenon is now used in the situation that in architecture, the sustainability agendas, they have infiltrated almost every aspect of life, and you cannot, and this is what we encounter constantly in our debates, and when we try to introduce aesthetic concerns, we are told no. A friend of mine was in Vienna a couple of years ago, and he saw entire blocks painted green. And when he asked the local, he was looking for an apartment, and when he asked the agent says, well, it's for ecological reasons. Another example is a very prominent architect at the conference a couple of years ago, saying how his concerns about CO2 emissions have made him design buildings with large balconies so that people could grow trees on them. So that type of thing is, we are talking about a phenomenon in which narratives about sustainability are used, and this is what interests me, the phenomenon where such narratives are used to suppress genuine aesthetic concerns, where ecology, talk about CO2 emissions and so on, is used to suppress, and that's the topic of my project, is really how this is done, and I'm going to work through some examples here. Less than 2 years ago, in a debate at Norwegian television, an Oslo architecture professor openly stated that aesthetic concerns must give way to what is practical and sustainable. And fair enough, but the response also has to be that a built abomination is a built abomination, and the fact that it is functional, sustainable, doesn't make it less abominable. So basically what is going on is architecture with aesthetic and its aesthetic qualities or lack of aesthetic qualities is as much a public act as CO2 emission, and the general public has the right to protest against aesthetic pollution. So this is the background, and one thing that when we have to be aware that when architects embark on such narratives in order to defend aesthetic failures, and these narratives pertain to topics that are, unless they have engineering degrees, that are completely outside their field of competence, we should not overlook that the enthusiasm for such concerns, so-called ecological concern, that they parade is merely a way to conceal the deep anguish about the predicaments of the state of the profession in general. So this is really what is the concern. What I am interested here then are narratives about sustainability that justify visual ugliness, and they fundamentally depend on one very, very important assumption, and that's the assumption that you can get away with by producing words. So basically, that visual aesthetic problems can be suppressed by and disregarded by talking and by producing narratives about buildings. For instance, one important distinction is that there are two kinds of properties in architecture. There are visual formal properties, the way the building looks like, how colors fit together, how spaces are composed, how ornaments are placed, and so on. And there are those and these are visual formal properties. And then there are conceptual properties. The building represents something, the building has a meaning, the building, and so on and so on. So these are everything that can be associated with it. The way Jeffrey Scott would say, ideas associated with architectural works. So these properties can only be taught conceptually. Those visual formals, you can just imagine them, but you cannot imagine visually what words are associated with it. Vice versa, those ideas that you associate with architectural works, you can only express through words. And here belong also narratives about CO2 emissions. Now, it is reasonable to assume that aesthetic properties, some of them depend on these visual and formal properties, some of them on verbal properties, conceptual properties. But the moment you have dismissed visual formal qualities and insist only on ideas associated with architectural works, only conceptual ideas, then you are in a strong conceptualist position. And this is what we have witnessed now massively in debates here around Arkitekturopprøret here in Norway. These debates have triggered on the side of profession a hardcore conceptualist response from the architectural establishment, saying that architecture is more than superficial concern with what the building looks like, that visual concerns are shallow, that architectural works have more profound aspects such as their meaning, cultural, and so on, not to talk about such concerns as modern material sustainability and so on. Now, it is uncontroversial that architecture has a social, cultural role, that it must satisfy regulations, safety requirements, so on. But it is not enough, it is not a reason to say that it doesn't matter what the building looks like. And this conceptualism is now massively ingrained in architecture education. This is something that we who teach, we encounter that as over decades I've taught in various countries. One pattern is suppression of entrance examinations based on visual skills, drawings, ability to draw, basing admission to architecture schools on grades in chemistry, biology, you name it. At this moment, I do not know a single architecture school that ensures that colorblind students are not admitted in the program or that they do not graduate. That's a very interesting, like I do not know a single school where for instance, a colorblind student couldn't actually pass through the program. That's a very interesting situation. And also when you look, like, I mean, I get this thing with my students now, and I've been doing this question in various places where I've taught. Once students get towards their higher years, towards the end of their education, one thing I like is to make a vote to ask them, okay, now, why did you get the grade you got in studio? Like, you've been now studying architecture for 3-4 years. And what do you think, why did you get the grade you got? Was it because of the shapes of the building's design, how the building looked like, how spaces were composed, visual formal qualities? Or is it because of the story you told in the crit narrative you associated with the building, how you presented verbally the story about the building, predominantly on these votes, its narrative, it's the story, and so on, that really matters. I know an architecture school where they finally, that students say, this is why we get the grade. It's not what the building looks like. It's the story we tell in the crit situation. I know of a school where they actually looked at the grades from earlier year, like high school grades of students who performed the best in their studios, who got the best studio grades, and these are the students who had the best grades in English and literature before they entered architecture schools. So that tells you how much architecture education today suppresses, and this is why Professor Kuhl is so right about emphasizing the importance of education and everything that's going on. And I can just go on talking about this and giving examples, but we must be aware that architects who come from this education, from this type of education, then I think they can only dismiss visual qualities. Now, I would then go very quickly because now possibly. So now what we get here is a series of situations where narrative-enhanced design took over. One phenomenon is this situation where you can actually associate any shape with any narrative. So in this case, the National Gallery here, what's interesting is that this architect claimed that this is a classical building and that it was motivated. Obviously, it depends on the medium you're talking to and where he's presenting to. Something more interesting is the situation where narratives about sustainability are used in order to justify. Let me see. In this case, the building that received the Architectural Pretty Ugliness Prize in 2023, when the criticism came, the authors were quick to point out that they concentrated on function and sustainability, that the building so close to the airport needs to be functional, and so on and so on. Sorry? And similar narratives we got for the Volkslöcke in Oslo. Good architecture is not only the facade of the building, and that the way the building looks should be seen in relation to its other qualities. That modern building must fit modern times, and even that architects' forming of the facade may someday prove to belong to aesthetics of the future. So basically, these are all narratives that are used in order to suppress aesthetic issues. And in the case of Volkslöcke, for instance, you would have solar panels as an excuse. But I wanted to, this was actually my very interesting example here. This is a building in Brattørkaia in Trondheim that's been much praised because it has something like 3,000 square meters of glass panels, and it's supposed to completely eliminate, it's supposed to produce more energy than it would during its span, then it would consume and so on, so during its lifespan. So now here is the debate, and this is I have now to be very short, but here is the debate. Is basically one line of criticism goes to say, okay, now daylight periods are insufficient, and obviously in winter you don't have enough sun. I mean, you almost don't get any sun in Trondheim. It's 63 degrees and latitude, and so what is going on? And then you get the answer, okay, but we provided in cellar, we provided large space for batteries one day when this is technologically resolved how to store energy. So basically, this is a science fiction scenario. The second line of argument is clearly the issue: why do you need solar panels in the city? Because this is now. You could put them in a field and wouldn't really disturb the situation in the city. But the real problem, and then comes the debate: okay, do we need solar panels in the city? Why would we put them if we can have solar panel plantations outside cities? But now, what's really interesting here is the northern facade. And this is where the whole fiasco comes through, because becomes obvious, because this is the northern facade of the same building. It's basically as unimaginative and as dull as it can be. But this is the main facade. This is the facade where the building looks like towards the harbor. This is the view that the people who arrive to Trondheim, by all the tourists who arrive by ships, and this is what they see. So basically, this entire talk about solar panels, about providing energy and so on, it's basically an excuse. It's not really there because there is no, I mean, nobody puts solar panels on the northern side. This is the northern side, but that happens to be the main facade. And that's where we are, where we can see how, and this is this phenomenon that I'm interested in, how narratives about sustainability are used to justify architectural failures. And this is what's really going on. This is a building on a major axis in Trondheim, seen from the city center. It is a building very close to a historic train station. It's a building that on this northern facade, it looks on a street where basically on the landing, where people arrive by ships, and solar panels are actually relevant. What we are talking about is the lack of visual concerns on the side of the architect. Now, just a conclusion is actually very similar to what Professor Karl was saying. Is what we had is the importance of education, because visual formal concerns have been suppressed in architecture education ever since narratives took over, and that was already very early in the modernist movement. The rejection of visual formal concerns, when you read through the writings of Mies, of CM, and so on, it's there in the 1920s, 1930s, up to Peter Eisenman, who dismisses pretty architecture, as he says, in the 1990s. So it's there. We are also, modernism became dominant after 1945 for economic reasons. Modernist buildings were cheaper and easier to design in the moment when architects had a lot of work to do. So this was the wave that by the 1960s, 1970s, it became clear that this is not going anywhere, and this is the moment when narratives about meanings, about spirit of the place, and so on came into use. The next wave came in the 1990s with deconstruction, where basically the words that would sell the building were disruption, dislocation, deflection, deviation, distortion, and so on. So this was, and what we are having now in sustainability is it talks about sustainability with this greenwashing that is constantly used in order to justify suppression of aesthetic and formal visual concerns, is essentially a new decon. The way the construction dominated in the 90s, so nowadays today you just have to talk about CO2 emissions and whatnot. It doesn't matter really. It doesn't a building, it will justify a building that completely fails on the northern side. That doesn't matter. You can use that narrative to justify any shape anyhow. The way that National Gallery here was declared for a classical design building and so on. And the only way to get out of this, and this is something well, our architecture education is in a serious crisis. And it's in crisis in the sense that suppression of visuality, formal aesthetic concerns has been going on for very long, that you don't have even people, not only who can teach alternatives, but who really understand that there could be alternatives to this. So I think that summer schools are one very important way to go about it. And God help us, so that's all. Thank you.